Welcome back to the most accurate podcast here at 4for4 Football. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle, joined today by good friend in life, John Paulson. And Paulson, we are just 2 weeks out, if you can imagine, from veterans reporting to training camp. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I'm working my way through the receiver position now, doing some extra study, extra homework, doing my player blurbs, my draft notes that I've been posting to Twitter and to Threads and to Instagram so everybody can see them, and kind of tweaking the rankings as I go, getting ready for Scott Fishbowl live draft on Saturday. Excited.
Live draft in LA?
Yeah, it's LA, but it's actually Orange, and that's actually the city I live in, which is in Orange County. So all the LA folks have to drive down, and they grumble and complain about it at the draft. So that's always fun to hear them.
Well, if you're participating in either the Orange Live draft or on Sunday, 11 a.m. Central Time in Chicago, the live draft, which I will be at with a bunch of friends. Andy Behrens, Rob Wozniak, Connor Allen will also be there. Then please jump out, shout out to both of us. I will definitely buy you a drink if you're in Chicago. Before we begin, though, we started a new segment that we are going to do for the rest of the offseason with Sigmund Bloom anyways last week. And we're going to continue that segment today in the risers and fallers ADP shifts that are happening right now on Underdog. And I think it's best to begin with Nico Collins, who has seen his ADP rise in the last 7 days from 130 to 123, nearly jumping around as his ADP continues to climb. So what are your thoughts as you continue to update projections in the back end for everyone? What are your thoughts on Nico Collins and this Texans offense?
Well, I think, heading into this summer, you're looking at this receiver room and you're wondering what's happening, number one, and where these targets are going to go. Dalton Schultz, obviously a big addition to the tight end room, and he's going to soak up a lot of targets. So I really do think it's between Collins and Schultz to lead this team in targets. And Collins, I think, did show some flashes last year with, subpar quarterback play. And, he's a player on the rise. So I think, you look at the Texans, they're probably going to, not win a whole lot of games. They're probably going to be down. They're going to probably have to throw the ball a bit more than they would like to. And I think Collins would be one of the primary beneficiaries. I don't think Robert Woods is in a position to be the number one there. Noah Brown, Tank Dell. Tank Dell might be interesting from a, volume standpoint if he can get in on the starting lineup in the three receiver sets at least. But, I think it's coming down to Collins and Schultz for that number one passing target in that offense.
Collins started the offseason in rounds 13, 14. Of course, that was before Brandon Cooks was traded to Dallas. But it's someone I continue to jump on, whether or not I believe in this offense as a whole, just because I believe his situation's good. His 18.1% target per route run rate for his career with Brandon Cooks on the field actually has increased even last season to 25.4% with Cooks off of it. And that 25.4% rate would have ranked 11th overall, just ahead of Travis Kelce, actually, among all players with at least 100 targets last year. So it's clearly a significant bump in opportunity that he's received without Brandon Cooks for his career. Also, remember, Houston's quarterbacks, this machination of players that don't matter last season, combined for the lowest catchable pass rate of any quarterback's room. Whereas CJ Stroud now has entered the league, and Stroud led his class in catchable rate on targets both 10 yards deep and 20 yards deep. Literally the best deep ball thrower of this class. And so as a one-for-one profile on the Texans offense, like the rest of their players, we have a first down pontoon boat in Dalton Schultz, and then run blocking receivers the rest of the way. And Noah Brown, Jeremy Mechie, all these guys who actually didn't have good profiles to begin with. Nico Collins, a big boundary receiver where he gets downfield targets, now connecting with CJ Stroud. That's why I want to be on top of Collins and ahead of him more so than anyone else in this offense. So I do think Collins is worth his ADP right now.
Yeah, I would just add that you look at his ADP, it's wide receiver 57. I don't know that there's a, assumed wide receiver one in any offense going that late in drafts. So I like to find the number one targets, or in the receiver rooms in the middle, late rounds, and add them. I think you look at his rookie season, 32 yards per game. Last year that bumped up to 48 yards per game. Didn't really spike in touchdowns, but that's kind of the nature of the offense. But I think you hit the nail on the head with Stroud. Like, he's really going to upgrade this passing attack, and I think that will certainly help both Schultz and Nico Collins.
The second player on Underdog I want to talk about is the fallout from Alvin Kamara's recent guilty admission, because over the last 7 days, his ADP has increased slightly from 103 to 101 overall. But I think what we know now, even as New Orleans football's Nick Underhill suggested that he does not believe Alvin Kamara's suspension will be up to 6 games. I'm personally eyeing 4 games. And so what are your thoughts, and what have you done with the projections based on this recent news?
Well, I always go to our friend Drew Davenport to see if he's got some information or his thoughts on it. And I retweeted a great thread of his this morning that I read, and he landed on 4 to 6, and he thinks it's going to be 4. I'm currently assuming 5 missed games for Kamara, and that's assuming 4 for the suspension plus 1 injury game.
Okay.
And that has moved him from like the mid 40s, because I had him like missing half the season prior to this news. That's moved him from the mid 40s up to 32 and half PPR. And as a result, Jamal Williams has taken a dip from the mid 30s or low 20s to down into the 40s, because it looks like we will have Kamara for majority of the season. He may sit out the first month and then come in, and then you have Alvin Kamara for the rest of the season. Now, it's a different offense. You got a different quarterback in there, and you wonder, how much his role is going to change. If you have Michael Thomas back, Kamara is less likely to see a ton of targets. We've seen that in the past. So there's a lot of moving parts here with this offense, but I think, given his current ADP and what's going to happen here and his history of scoring fantasy points, he may be worth a look there as you are starting to see his ADP climb. If he's still going RB 30, RB 35 off the board, then I think he's a decent to good value there, who, somebody who can down the stretch win you a lot of fantasy games.
I've been taking a lot of Kendre Miller and best ball, but also understand that the conversation about Miller in redraft is different. Miller, of course, a career 6.7 yards per carry at TCU in a championship-led offense last season. Also last year, at least one 20-yard run. So a very explosive player, at least one of those in 12 of 14 games before he was injured. We, of course, haven't heard or seen much about Kendre Miller since he's still been recovering from that injury in January, but I expect him to be an integral part of this backfield. So how are you projecting Miller?
I have him as the third back. They went out and, signed Jamal Williams to be that banger. And I think if they have Kamara and Williams, then I don't think, Miller's going to see a whole lot of work unless he's really flashing. But he's got to maybe, if this suspension is at 4 games at the start of the year, he's going to have a little audition there where he could see 8 to 10 touches per game. And if he really does well in that workload, then he could see a larger role as the season wears on.
I still want to draft Kamara in best ball, especially since we've seen suspended players get ADP dips, and it ultimately not matter since we're trying to play into a 17-week season. So I'm not worrying about any dips for Kamara or suspension. I'm still taking him if we are getting an ADP discount, and then just crossing my finger he blows up in the best ball playoffs. Also, remember, right now, all these projections updates Paulson has talked about, my team previews that begin rolling out when training camps begin in a couple weeks, not to mention the rankings that will happen weekly, the waiver wire column, which will be coming back September 2nd ahead of week 1 for everyone. You can access that now ahead of time. You can get a great discount by signing up at Vivid Picks and by depositing and thus getting 100% of your first deposit matched up to $200. You can then also get any of our subs at 4for4.com for just $5. It's the best deal going right now. We'll still have the early bird sale once training camp officially opens. But right now, creating that account on Vivid Picks and then getting that $5 sub at 4for4 before all of this starts being released in a couple weeks is absolutely the best deal. And so that's what I want everyone to do before we jump in. Let's go, though, Paulson, to our flag plants. And I understand it's June. It's the doldrums of the offseason. Everyone's on vacation except you and I, and we're still here talking football. But we've been doing this for so long now this offseason that I'm already aware of the players I'm excited to draft in home leagues because I know they're going to dip since everyone only drafts last year's stats. And so I want to start off with someone I've been hammering home in every show on this feed, friends' feeds, and that's Cooper Kupp. Because right now, Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson, and Jamar Chase all undoubtedly have the same ceiling outcome. But Cooper Kupp is the only one of those four who is not being treated as such, as someone who can finish with the most fantasy points of any player at any position in 2023. And it's not fair. I have already been on a radio show in Columbus, and I mentioned about Cooper Kupp being my wide receiver 2 overall. And they kind of laughed, which is no big deal. And they said, you think Cooper Kupp can outscore Jamar Chase? When the real question should be, you think Jamar Chase can outscore Cooper Kupp? Because last year, Cooper Kupp already outscored Jamar Chase. Cooper Kupp was the wide receiver 1 in points per game last year, 18.2. He led all players in target share, 33.3% in those 8 games with Matthew Stafford. We're also expecting, as I've mentioned earlier this offseason, more plays per game. Since last year's offense under Sean McVay was his first to average fewer than 62 plays per game, and they averaged 58.5. A substantial decrease from what Sean McVay's offenses have historically brung to the table. So, of course, Cooper Kupp can finish as the wide receiver 1 overall, considering he's already did that in points per game last year. I will be leaving every home league with Cooper Kupp, knowing he's not going to be drafted in the first 8 to 10 picks because, again, people use recency bias in those formats.
Yeah, I mean, they're probably, worried about injury or something. They're scared off by that. But he had the top points per game last year, 18.2 in half PPR formats. Great rapport with Matthew Stafford. Zero competition for targets in that offense. So, I have him as my number 2 fantasy receiver as well behind Justin Jefferson.
That's my value in the first round. What about your first flag plant, regardless of the round?
Yeah, I have to. I don't know what's going on. I guess I know. I watch Twitter and and now we're on Threads too, and I see the Alexander Mattison debate, and it just goes ongoing, and it's strange to me that for years and years and years he was this 0 RB darling. You want to have this guy because if Dalvin Cook gets injured, he's going to post fantasy RB1 numbers and has posted fantasy RB1 numbers whenever Dalvin Cook has been hurt. But now that he's actually the starter, he's a dead zone running back, doesn't have any talent, shouldn't draft him as an RB2. And I just think the whole thing's kind of comical. I don't care as much. I don't get into he's talented, he's not talented, or he's the greatest running back in the world, or he's not. I mean, I do like to look at the tackle breaking stats, yards after contact. I think those are interesting to kind of signal some talent. But to me, it's touches, it's workload. And I think Alexander Mattison is going to see a huge workload. It may not be as big as the 7 starts that he had from 21 to 22 or 2020 to 2021, when he averaged 23.3 touches for 118 yards, 0.72 touchdowns per game, basically mid-range RB1 numbers. Last year, Dalvin Cook averaged 17.8 touches in the new offense there in Minnesota. So I think we're probably going to see something around 18 touches per game for him. And he can produce low-end RB1 numbers in that sort of workload. He's done it in the past. The offense is going to be pretty good with Kirk Cousins, a little pass heavy, so he should get some receptions as well. Just think that Alexander Mattison is like RB19 off the board is just a very good value right now.
I'm playing devil's advocate. It's not even about the talent. It's just the fact that in the first year in Kevin O'Connell's offense, Dalvin Cook did get the usage and recording the 3rd most routes run among all running backs, but he only averaged the 21st most targets per game, 3.3 among all running backs. So it's as if perhaps the passing game usage may not matter for the running backs in this offense as a whole, especially when we're now factoring in Jordan Addison to the mix, which they didn't have last year. And so that's my concern, is that Mattison's ceiling is lacking, not to mention that, yes, maybe it is a timeshare. I don't know. I guess that's what we're debating right now is it going to be a timeshare? Because if not, then he might get there just on touches alone.
Yeah, it's a volume play. Dalvin Cook finished RB10 last year in this same offense. I would, maybe Dalvin's a little bit better, but I don't think it's significant, the difference between the two players. It certainly hasn't borne out whenever Mattison has gotten the starting work. Dalvin Cook had the 13th highest points per game, and he averaged a pretty decent 2.3 receptions per game. So I think, it's not like, Mattison's going to get 4 or 5 catches a game, but there's enough passing usage there that he should be going higher than he is.
My second flag plant is actually an affirmative statement, because Josh Jacobs will 100% be the worst first-round pick in all of fantasy football this year. Much like Najee Harris, and how we understood he was the worst first-round pick last year, given how he earned touches and targets and all of the changes in that offense. It's very reminiscent of Josh Jacobs' season this year. First of all, only 4 other running backs besides Jacobs over the last decade have seen over 390 touches like Jacobs did last year. It's not something that will happen, and it won't happen again for Jacobs if we're betting on that historical oddity. Also, this offense, after seeing what he did last year, even this organization said, we don't want to give you a large deal. We don't want you to try to follow that up. And so they're lacking the same confidence as well to bring him back and put him in that role, as he has yet to receive a long-term contract extension and will likely be playing on a 1-year deal instead, even though he didn't report to OTA. So we have to see that play out in training camp as well. But the usage and the history of running backs for those other 4 guys who did see 390 plus touches the following year, none recorded more than 237 touches the next season when they played. And so we're just already fighting an uphill battle, unless you're in a league where you get to carry over Josh Jacobs' points from last season. And so I think it's just very clear, given the role change, given the usage, given what the organization thinks this offseason, that Jacobs is definitely not the player we got last year. And now's the time to allow your league mates to draft him instead.
If I could play devil's advocate, just because it's fun, the things pointing to another big season are, maybe we're not getting as big of a season, but they didn't give him a long-term contract, but they want him back on the franchise tag. So they do want the guy back. They didn't do anything at the running back position in significant note. So he's still going to see the bulk of the carries and the touches. And yes, there's one concern I have, and I would agree with you on this, is that if Jimmy Garoppolo isn't healthy and they're running Brian Hoyer out there, quarterback or whoever, this whole offense could be a lot worse than what we saw last year, which wasn't a great offense, but it was pretty good. The thing that does give me some encouragement, though, on the flip side of that, is that the offensive line is really good. They have the number 1 adjusted line yards at Football Outsiders, so he is running behind one of the best units in the league. I think, top 5 is definitely pushing it. I have him at 6 right now, but I'm, Derrick Henry, Tony Pollard, Saquon Barkley, due to the contract thing below him. That might be a tough tier to rank right now, given everything going on with everybody's contract. I mean, Josh Jacobs is not under contract either. He said he would return to the team if they added talent, and they didn't really add any talent. They added a tight end in the draft, but and Jacoby Myers, but they lost their quarterback. And, he's kind of in the same situation as Barkley in terms of whether or not he wants to sign that tender.
I'm also not yet convinced it's Brian Hoyer, because Brian Hoyer, outside of the one time Ian Book started in the COVID season, is the worst quarterback we've seen in the last 5 years. Having added Aiden O'Connell, I'm still convinced he would start if Jimmy Garoppolo's foot surgery doesn't heal in time for week 1. And even that would likely be a disaster. So again, an entire offensive scheme change absolutely has me worried. This is my opinion when we first started doing research ahead of the draft in February. The issue in best ball is that, as sharp as it is, especially on underdog, everyone also saw that. And so Jacobs falls to the 3rd round, and that's okay. Like it was last year. Najee Harris, 3rd round, that's okay. That was okay last year. The first round, though, in home leagues, absolute stop sign. You cannot do it. You have to let your league mates do it. What about your second flag plan?
I can't, I just behind the scenes here, I came today with 16 of them or 15 of them. So I've got some guys that I like, but Terry McLaurin, I want to talk about him, kind of being slept on a little bit. He's wide receiver 23. His last 3 years, he has posted the 8th most receiving yards in the league among receivers. Last year, among the 88 receivers with at least 30 catches, he had the 14th highest yards after contact per catch, and he had the 11th most broken tackles per reception in that subset. And he does very well in the route running metrics over at reception perception. So I think the concern here, I think he's got 3,000 yard receiver seasons in a row. He went over 1,100, I think, a couple times. So I think the concern here is Sam Howell. And this is sort of I'm also planting my flag that Sam Howell is going to be a very good fantasy quarterback with his rushing ability, but I think he can also throw it. I watched all his throws in the start that he had. I think it was against the Cowboys. He hit McLaurin on a deep ball. He threw well. And I think McLaurin might get the best quarterback play that he's had in his career. I mean, it's been kind of a rough go in terms of the quarterbacks he's had throwing to him over his first 3 seasons or his last 3 seasons. So I think this passing attack is going to be better. And I think McLaurin should be going maybe a round earlier than he is.
McLaurin is yet to finish top 20 and half PPR points per game from his career, but I definitely don't blame that on him, as he's also one of the best route runners you can ask anyone, any receiver, any cornerback, any journalist in the entire league. We know that he's only seen targets so far in his career from Dwayne Haskins, Taylor Heineke, Alex Smith, Carson Wentz, Case Keenum, Kyle Allen, Colt McCoy, Garrett Gilbert, and then last year in the final week of the season, Sam Howell. I attribute that to McLaurin's lack of success more than anything else. So I tend to agree with you. Curtis Samuel did lead this team in targets for basically 2 months of the year last year. And then Jahan Dotson closed with the team leading targets over the final month of the season. But if I still have to pick one, of course, I think Terry McLaurin leads this team in targets from someone I know you're ahead of in projections, ahead of consensus compared to the entire industry, Sam Howell.
Yeah. And, you listed those quarterbacks, and I just want to underline it's touchdowns is the issue. I mean, he had 1,118. He was wide receiver 20 in his 3 years ago, or it was last year. 77 for 1,053 and 5 touchdowns, wide receiver 25, and then 77 for 1,191 and 5 touchdowns, wide receiver 18. So I think what I'm doing is I eliminated week 18, so that might be why he did pop in the top 20 in my numbers. But the fact that he was able to get the 8th most receiving yards in those 3 years combined from those quarterbacks, I think tells you, I think it speaks to his talent. And if he gets decent, just average quarterback play, he could break out even further.
All right. I've given 2 top end guys statements, so I'm going to start slipping back a little bit, because even as I continue to play a lot more best ball, we get to these middle rounds where receivers are meddling beyond the 8th round, and I start thinking, who has upside in this range? And this is not going to be a popular opinion. It's going to come out of nowhere. But I genuinely think Damien Harris is one of the best picks on the board right now. And as I continue to write my team previews again, which will be start releasing on the site once veterans report the training camp at the end of the month, there's a real chance here, Paul said, that Damien Harris can lead the league in rushing touchdowns. Think about what this organization has said and emphasized throughout the offseason after Josh Allen injured his elbow and basically turned the entire division on its head over the second half of the season. Allen said his rushing, or Sean McDermott said Josh Allen's rushing is, quote, never going to completely go away, but it has to get where it's workable. And then Allen came out around the combine and told media, quote, he will have to transition from being a football player first and quarterback second to a QB first and football player second. And that's reminiscent of what's happened with the Chiefs offense and Patrick Mahomes, because ever since Patrick Mahomes broke his kneecap in week 7 of the 2019 season, the Kelsey brothers on their podcast even said it's been emphasized by Andy Reid to make sure Mahomes does not get carries inside the 5. And that's why he has just 6 carries inside the 5-yard line since he broke his kneecap. That's a span of 4 seasons, and they will not allow him to carry in that range because that's when the field is condensed and bodies are just crashing into one another in the line of scrimmage. And if that's going to be the case, if that's how we're going to keep Josh Allen healthy, is to still allow him to be a one-of-one talent between the 20s with his scrambling, but actually just take the ball out of his hands and keep him healthy inside the 5-yard line. The ball's not going to James Cook. James Cook didn't get a single carry inside the 5-yard line last year, whereas we are just 1 year removed from Damien Harris registering 15 touchdowns. It's going to go to him, the big body bulldozer instead. And if we can get that kind of touchdown upside, I understand Cook will still probably be primarily honed in on in the passing game, and that's not going to be Harris's role. But we still want the touchdown scores, especially when it comes to half PPR leagues like that. So I'm all in on Harris in that 10 to 12 round range this year.
I think your logic is strong. I think the way you feel about Damien Harris has got to be a function of what you feel about James Cook and how many of those carries between the 20s is he going to get versus Harris. Is Harris just going to be the goal line back, or is he going to be the primary between the tackles guy? And is James Cook going to play a lot? So that's the question. You look at his Cook season last year, 89 carries for 507 yards, 2 touchdowns, 5.7 yards per attempt. So that's, pretty healthy efficiency there. Zach Moss was still there for 5 games. But it was, Devin Singletary for 177 carries for 819 yards and 5 touchdowns. So if you think that Harris is going to take over Devin Singletary's rushing, all of it, and Cook, if he sees more touches than the 90 carries, he sees it as a receiver, because Singletary caught 38 passes, Cook caught 21. So if you get Cook to 40 or 50 catches, and Harris has 10 or 15 or maybe 10 or 20, but he's getting all the goal line work, then he's certainly going to pay dividends if they do in fact back off Josh Allen at the goal line. I've got him projected for 4.5 rushing touchdowns. I believe he's been at 6 or 7 plus the last 3 years. So I'm seeing the same things, the same news reports saying that he's going to rush the ball a little bit less.
To provide context to your point as well, Zach Moss was healthy scratched, then traded, and then Buffalo played 13 games without him. So James Cook had his opportunity last year with only Devin Singletary in the way, a player they had no issue in re-signing. But James Cook only out-touched Devin Singletary in 3 of 13 games the rest of the way. They do not care about James Cook being a primary ball carrier in this backfield. And thus, I'm trying to get away from him. As Jason points in the chat as well, I'm actually not ruling that out. But if Damien Harris were shockingly cut, and I still think it would be a shocking turn of events, that just means they have that much more confidence in Latavius Murray, not James Cook. Latavius Murray, of course, who pulled the rug out from under us, even though we were on top of him in the waiver wire, by actually becoming a relevant back in fantasy football. So that's the role, at least, I want everyone to watch out for, rather than James Cook's, your next flag plant.
Yeah, and I was going to talk about Tyler Lockett here, but I feel like I talk about Tyler Lockett too much. Especially
pre-show, when you mentioned Tyler Lockett to me too behind the scenes, I thought, I've already said my Tyler Lockett stats on this very show like 3 times this offseason. I can't keep recycling them.
I really want our subscribers to draft Tyler Lockett, wide receiver 33 off the board. But I'm not going to talk about him right now. I'm going to talk about Diontae Johnson instead, because I don't think he's getting enough love right now. In terms of his ADP, I think is wide receiver 30, 31, something like that. I didn't check Underdog, but it's way down there. And he had no touchdowns on 147 targets. So yesterday I pulled a stat because I was curious, and I looked at all the receivers who saw between 142 and 152 targets since 2010. Mm-hmm. And how many touchdowns did they have on average? It was 7.26 touchdowns on average. So if he had just been average in the touchdown department, he would have, if he had just caught 5, he would have finished wide receiver 22 instead of wide receiver 35. His career to date touchdown to target rate before last season was 4.9%. If you apply that to his 147 targets, it comes out to the same number, 7.26 touchdowns. And he would have finished as the fantasy wide receiver 19 last year. So I think the whole context of it is his touchdowns are not sticky. And when you're a player that sees this much volume, you are going to, start seeing touchdowns. And I think just looking at the averages from the last, 50 players that saw that many targets and his typical target rate, it really comes down to Kenny Pickett. Now, is he going to be better than what he was last year? I looked at his college stats. He was above average in terms of the rookies coming in terms of his touchdown rate. So I think he just had a bad year. He should bounce back. The passing game should bounce back. And Diontae Johnson will be a primary beneficiary given his role in that offense.
I'll go back even further just to add to your point, because 833, if you can wrap your head around this one, 833 wide receivers have seen at least 110 targets in the Super Bowl era. So a span of 50 plus years. And Diontae Johnson last year was the only one of those 833 to not score a single touchdown. Now, regression entails even one touchdown, right? Like one touchdown would then be regression. At the same time, though, I'm trying to bet on Pittsburgh's passing offense, and that includes Kenny Pickett, regardless of what I think of him as a player on the field, because Pittsburgh's 42.8% rate of passing touchdowns last year was also the fifth lowest mark of the last decade, something we are also expecting to increase because the four offenses prior to Pittsburgh's last year that did the same, less than 43% rate, bounced back and averaged an increase of 22.7% the next year. And so that's kind of the rates and the bumps I'm looking at for Pittsburgh's passing offense. Thus, I want to be on top of Diontae Johnson for sure in that wide receiver 2 range.
Yeah, I think I would like to come out of my drafts with Terry McLaurin, Tyler Lockett, Diontae Johnson as my middle round guys, sprinkle in a stud tight end and a couple of good running backs and maybe a stud quarterback, and you're good to go.
And finally, because we've been doing this so long, I know how single quarterback redraft leagues work. And that is basically you draft Travis Kelce or you wait and get one starter, don't draft a backup that either you have confidence in because they will have an every down role or they have a good week 1 matchup. And then you just match tight end from there since it's a streaming position at a onesie spot. And if that's the case, if we're waiting to the very last round to draft our tight end in our home leagues, I think Hunter Henry is a really good option to lean on. Last year, he was the tight end 27 in points per game, but we saw that regression coming. He was the tight end 13 in points per game the year prior because he scored a career-high 9 touchdowns. But also, those career-high 9 touchdowns came on only 40 catches over the second half of the season. Like, it was such a small, finite stretch that was not sustainable, and we knew that. Thus, we weren't drafting him last year as a touchdown or bust option. But at least this year, we know that he's only 1 year removed from those stats, and he tied for the team lead in red zone targets with Jacoby Myers, who is no longer on this offense. Matt Patricia also no longer behind that laminated play calling sheet as one of the worst offensive coordinators in the entire league. We're instead getting, at least the news out of OTAs is 12 personnel, so 2 wide receivers and 2 tight ends, Mike Gesicki being the other one, on the field at all times. And Gesicki hasn't proven he can separate at any point. So I'd rather just go for the touchdown or bust option. And in terms of getting a starter for week 1, the Patriots open against the Eagles, who are just going to drown them in points. They're going to have to throw a lot. So I'm starting with Hunter Henry in the very last round.
I like it. Hunter Henry's always been kind of underrated as a pass catcher, and he's had his moments. I would also add, as far as a last round guy that's interesting, and this is not my flag plant, but Jake Ferguson for the Cowboys. I think everybody's confused about the pecking order right now. I think they drafted, but he missed all of OTAs. And George Kittle said that named Jake Ferguson as one of his 3 up-and-coming tight ends that are going to be next at the position. So he's an interesting player, last round, always available. But my guy, and I'm kind of a value hound when it comes to this, and I'm typically going early tight end, but if I get shut out on Kelsey, Mark Andrews, TJ Hawkinson, etc., I'm going to target Tyler Higbee and just have baseline production at the a position, and he's probably going later than 12 at the position. I'm sure of it. Let's see, Higbee is going 15 now, so he's moved up a little bit, I think, in recent weeks. But he saw 108 targets last year, 72 catches for 620 yards, 3 touchdowns. He had 5 touchdowns in each of the previous 2 seasons. Obviously, that passing attack was hurt by the absence of Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp last year, but both are back. Really, other than Cooper Kupp, no competition for targets for him. I think he's going to see another 100+ targets in this offense, and at the cost of a 12th round pick or whatever he is 12th round pick, 144 off the board. You can get a player who has top 10. He's the 110, 108 targets. You're likely to get top 10 numbers out of your tight end. And I think, with Stafford there back, the touchdowns are going to increase. And I think Higbee will get back to that 5+ touchdown rate that he was at the last 2 years.
I have some more, but with my annual targets and fade pieces coming out at the end of the month, I will save them for everyone else behind the scenes. What about you? Anyone else you want to touch on? Since I know you brought to the table, as you mentioned, 16 different players.
Well, I think tight end. I'm such an early tight end guy, but there are a couple of really appealing breakout types, and Chig Okonkwo for the Titans is one. He led the league led tight ends in yards per route run last year. Didn't see a ton of volume, but really had a pretty good rookie season, all things considered. Not a lot of target competition there right now, although DeAndre Hopkins might be in there, and that would change the thing, change things a little bit there. And then Greg Dulcich, he was kind of on the hot seat. You weren't sure if Sean Payton was going to come in and like him, but you could see the comments about him turning as the OTAs went on, and Payton could see what Dulcich could do. And obviously Payton has a long history of very productive tight ends, not just Jimmy Graham, but Jared Cook, etc. So Dulcich to tight end 13, second season. He had a good rookie year too, had some injuries, but he's got a lot of talent, and I think he'll be a breakout candidate as well.
I was out on Dulcich initially, knowing that Peyton sent 2 draft picks during draft weekend for his guy, Adam Troutman. But then post OTAs, Peyton came out and understood Dulcich's talent. He even called him, the quote is, quote, "The joker player for us is not a receiver," Peyton said. "It's either a running back or a tight end with exceptional ball skills, and then you can work matchups. We've had that at the running back spot. Reggie Bush was the joker, Darren Sproles, and Alvin Kamara. Those were all unique players, not just in the running game, but they had passing game skill sets that allowed you to do multiple things." And so it seems like even if Dulcich is not lined up in like the slot, for instance, he's still a part of the offense. They're building packages around him to keep him on the field in intricate ways. And that's what I want from my middle round tight end. So I agree with you. Dulcich is someone we should definitely be on top of.
Yeah, he's pick 133. If you don't get if you want a tight end 2 with upside, or you waited on tight end and you want to grab a couple of upside guys, you could grab a Higbee and Dulcich, or a Okonkwo and Dulcich, or 2 of the 3. The other thing, I have another quote from Peyton. Quote, "I think his menu is going to be lengthy in the passing game." I think that's music to our ears.
You just said everything I wanted to say in one sentence. So yes, good job.
Yeah, I mentioned Jared Cook, 500 yards, 700 yards with Peyton. Kobe Fleener, 631 yards with Peyton. Ben Watson, 74 for 825 and 6 with Sean Payton. Of course, Jimmy Graham, 85 for 889 and 10 touchdowns with Sean Payton. So he's kind of a tight end whisperer. So let's see if Dulcich can capitalize on that.
What else do you have currently running on the site for everyone?
I'm rolling out my draft notes, and I'll be putting together by the end of the month my 99 stats article, although we might break it up into multiple articles, but that's coming out by the end of the month. And then I start on my player sleepers and values articles in August.
And again, remember, you can join us with a new subscription to Vivid Picks and then get any sub you want at 4for4.com for just $5 ahead of the waterfall that's about to happen and fantasy football content. We'll be back, of course, next week with one more show grasping for straws until we actually get players on the field. So until then, remember, be a little bit kinder than what's required. We'll talk to you then.